Welcome, everyone. I'm Amanda Barnhart, President of the Young Adult Library Services Association. We are here this evening to honor our 2021 Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults winner and finalists. I would like to take a moment to welcome the award-winning authors who are here with us this evening. We have our nonfiction winner, Candace Fleming, and finalists, Christina Suntornvat, Amra Sabic-El-Rayess, and Rocco. I am now going to hand the program over to YALSA's 2021 Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults Award Committee Chair, Adrienne Gillespie.
First awarded in 2010, YALSA's Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults was created to honor the year's best nonfiction book published for young adults. This year's books represent the complexity of the human experience, both collective, as in All 13, How We Got to the Moon, and You Call This Democracy, or individual, as in The Cat I Never Named and The Rise and Fall of Charles Lindbergh. Each of these 5 books includes a wide range of voices, impeccable research, compelling prose, and appealing book design. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my fellow committee members and thank them for all their hard work. Danielle Ray Dredger-Babbitt, Jennifer Longi, Jill Bellamy, Lisa Goldstein, Katie Rickert, Joel Shoemaker, Carrie Townsend, and Dr. Terrell A. Young. Our first nonfiction award of the evening goes to Christina Suntornvat, author of All 13, The Incredible Cave Rescue of the Thai Boys Soccer Team, published by Candlewick Press. On June 23, 2018, 12 young soccer players and their coach became trapped by floodwaters in a northern Thailand cave. Clear maps, diagrams, photography, and firsthand interviews capture every detail of the rescue of all 13, an effort made by hundreds of volunteers. Their rescue seemed impossible, but as Christina Suntornvat shows in this page-turning book, miracles sometimes happen. Unfortunately, Christina is in Texas and has lost power. She was able to send a video, which we'll now play for you instead of hearing her live.
Hello, thank you so much to the members of the YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Committee for their work in judging this award and for this wonderful honor for all 13. I'm so thrilled to be sharing a screen with these other incredible authors tonight. This was my first middle grade nonfiction, and before I began, I called a family friend who's a journalist to ask for advice on interviewing people. He gave me lots of great tips, and one of the best was to always ask people, what surprised you about this event, or what misconceptions do you think people had? So I thought it would be interesting to share with you the misconceptions that I had about this book before I started writing it. And I'm going to be like that kid in your author visit who raises their hand and says, actually, I have 3 things to say. And so I'm going to share my 3 misconceptions about writing all 13. So the first is that when I began researching, I was sure that the main theme of my book was going to be what humans can achieve when they work together. After all, 10,000 people had toiled together for 18 days to successfully rescue 12 boys and their soccer coach in an unprecedented cave dive rescue in which it was almost sure that at least half of them would perish. But when I started interviewing people, a different theme bubbled up, that mindset is everything. From the rescuers above ground to the boys and their coach below who kept calm and alive through meditation, I learned that the most essential element in a crisis is thinking positively, staying composed, and never giving up hope. People all over the world were so inspired to see the rescuers collaborating because it's something we so rarely see now in our divided society. But that collaboration would not have been possible if the rescuers hadn't shared the belief that the lives of 13 ordinary young boys were as precious as any treasure. And if they hadn't shared the mindset that no matter what, that we're not going to give up. After writing this book, I'm convinced that there is no problem too great for humans to solve as long as we have compassion in our hearts and determination in our minds. My second misconception is that I thought this book was coming out way too late. When we sold all 13, I had a frank conversation with my editor, the wonderful Andrea Tompa at Candlewick Press, and I wanted to know when was the earliest we could possibly publish it. I worried that in our current events-obsessed society, people would lose interest in the rescue if we waited too late, if we didn't get the book out fast. But I knew I was going to have to return to Thailand to conduct interviews and do research, and the type of book that we wanted to produce with the beautiful artistry and design by Sherry Fatla, Lisa Rudden, and Karen Minot would take time. Candlewick Press really took a leap of faith with me, and for that I will always be grateful to Andrea, to Mary Lee Donovan, and to Karen Lotz. They trusted that even if it took longer, my Thai heritage would help me bring something special and unique to the project. It's my sincere wish that we will see more support for Own Voices nonfiction at every level of publishing. Even if it takes us a little longer, even if it seems like others have told our stories first, I promise that it will be worth it. And All 13 has found its way to readers more than 2 years after the rescue is over. We owe that primarily to the teachers and librarians who have championed this book and passed it along to their students. Lesson learned, never ever underestimate the power of a passionate librarian. My huge thanks to Anne Erza Lagat, Sawako Shirota, Dana Eager, Kathleen Rourke, and of course Jamie Tan at Candlewick, who never underestimate librarians ever. My last misconception, the third one, is one that I'm ashamed to admit. I thought that having a book come out during a pandemic would be the worst possible thing that could happen to me. Given how much people have suffered and sacrificed throughout this past year, I know that is an incredibly selfish and self-centered thought, and it was also so very wrong. Looking back on the past few months since the book has come out, I would not have had it any other way. I have been Zooming with schools all across the country. Some of the kids I meet are learning from home. Some of them are in classrooms, sitting behind plastic dividers, all wearing masks. Every single one of them has had a very, very difficult year. And I would not trade my time with them for anything. Together, the kids and I talk about the boys in the cave. We talk about how hope is the most important survival tool of all. I tell them that they are stronger than they think, and that as long as we all lean on each other, we are going to get through this. Sometimes I think I need to hear it more than they do. Tonight, I am full of gratitude and love for the people who tell stories, who listen to stories, and who champion stories. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know we are going to get through this, and I cannot wait to see you again soon once we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. Our next nonfiction award goes to Amra Sabic-El-Rayess, author of The Cat I Never Named, a true story of love, war, and survival, published by Bloomsbury Young Adult. In 1992, Amra's life is forever changed when Serbian troops seize her hometown of Bihać, Bosnia. Her family and other Muslims face hate, violence, and unimaginable horrors of war. An enlightening memoir of a Muslim teen trying to survive through the Bosnian genocide and the stray cat that protected her family throughout all her ordeals. Welcome, Amra.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good evening, everyone. I am grateful to YALSA and particularly the YALSA Nonfiction Committee for including my memoir, The Cat I Never Named, a true story of love, war, and survival in the company of exceptional nonfiction books for young adults. As a genocide survivor, I feel privileged to be alive. Every day that I wake up without bombs in the background is like waking up in paradise. During the Bosnian genocide in 1990s, when Serbs killed, raped, and disappeared Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, my birthday wish was to be blown up rather than suffer in a rape camp for Muslim girls. I never planned on living, so being here with you tonight was not even among the wildest of my dreams. But what I have left of my past is broken country and wealth of memories. Many of my friends and family members I had deeply loved are forever gone. Today, Bosnia and Herzegovina is ethnically segregated, and in some schools, Muslim children are not allowed to share a classroom and teachers with non-Muslims. In fact, in these, as we call them, two schools under one roof, Muslim and non-Muslim students are not permitted to play together, even during recess. In 2007, the International Court of Justice established that the Serb military and police committed genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes against Bosnian Muslims like me. Yet the half of Bosnia that is now called the Serb Republic is a place whose very existence legitimizes genocide. The Serb Republic is where the majority of Serbs still deny and justify genocide through the continued narrative of hate and Islamophobia. As my handsome and kind Tata said to me once during the war, Amra, you might be killed and even raped, but if you live, no one can ever take away your education. Surviving genocide was the most valuable education I had gained in my life, including a lesson that hate can be more powerful than love if we let it be. The cat I never named is a warning that hatred is not exclusive to any one nation or group of people. Genocide is not a tragedy from our distant history, but a lived experience for some of us. Even in America, that many see as exceptional, we face three pandemics: that of COVID-19, racism, and extremism. But two of these pandemics are in our power to end now. For many genocide survivors, the most important form of justice is often a simple acknowledgement and hope that the inhumane crimes committed against us will never be suffered by anyone else. Instead, the continued genocide, denial, and anti-Muslim racism by those who either partook in the violence or condone genocidal killings keep the old wounds alive, open. But what I have discovered in writing The Cat I Never Named is that the writing process has healed some of my wounds. Many genocide survivors now living around the world have reached out to me. Some have read The Cat I Never Named with their children, and in the process shared their own stories for the first time. Many second-generation Bosniaks have been inspired to initiate their own conversations in their schools, libraries, and communities about ways to counter all forms of hate and racism, and I am deeply grateful for their collective activism. As you can imagine, writing The Cat I Never Named has been emotionally demanding, but also empowering and validating. I could not have done it without Laura Sullivan, who helped me embrace my literary voice. I'm equally grateful to my entire Bloomsbury team, including Susan Dobinik, Sarah Shumway, Faye B., Erica Barmash, Beth Eller, and Jasmine Miranda, as well as Shazlin Khan for a beautifully illustrated cover. Many thanks to my book agents, Rob McKilkin and Jason Anthony, who recognized the power of The Cat I Never Named from the moment that I shared the first few stories with them. It was ultimately love that saved me during the genocide. And it is now the love of my husband, Tamer, and two daughters, Jana and Dina, that has healed me along with The Cat I Never Named. Last but not least, I have to thank The Cat I Never Named, or Matsi, which means kitty in Bosnian, who is one of the main characters in my memoir. She was a magical calico who, in the face of the unbearable pain, tragedy, and hate, gave her unconditional and selfless love to this once viscerally hated Muslim girl. Her grace, kindness, brilliance, and love were unparalleled. I would have been killed on the first day of bombing in my city on June 12, 1992, if it were not for Matsi. On another occasion, she traveled for 35 miles to find us again. Even when humans failed me, she never did. I will forever be grateful to Matsi for her healing love. And with this award, I wish to recognize and honor Matsi, as well as all of the victims of the Bosnian genocide who are not here to share their stories with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amra. Our next award goes to John Rocco, author and illustrator of How We Got to the Moon, the people, technology, and daring feats of science behind humanity's greatest adventure, published by Crown Books for Young Readers, an imprint of Random House Children's Books, a division of Penguin Random House. This extensively researched and illustrated account demonstrates the magnitude of ingenuity and creativity involved in the years-long effort to reach the moon. John Rocco's exquisite illustrations and diagrams pair perfectly with his clear text to illuminate the grit, determination, and hard work to achieve the goal. Also, the problem solving, the organization, the science, and the sheer cleverness of it all. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Adrienne. First off, I'm extremely grateful to have my book, How We Got to the Moon, recognized by the YALSA committee. It's an incredible honor. Thank you. I would like to start off by talking about gravity. Gravity is this unseen force that keeps us stuck to this planet. Human beings have been stuck here for 200,000 years. Our ancestors have been stuck here for 6 million years. Gravity is this incredible, far-reaching force that you cannot escape. It's what keeps the moon in orbit around the Earth, and it's what keeps us in orbit around the sun. But for one brief moment in the entire history of humankind, we broke those chains of Earth's gravity. In 1968, we sent 3 human beings in a spacecraft so far out into the void that they would be the very first to surrender to the influence of a different gravity, that of the moon. With the success of Apollo 8, we continued the Apollo missions for 3 more years. 24 human beings in all were hurled so far out into space they could look back and see the entire Earth. 24, that's it. No one has done it since. This incredible feat of engineering has had this stranglehold on my imagination for years. The more I read about it, the more I began to understand that the Apollo missions were an incredible blueprint for how to solve massive problems. Yes, the landing a man on the moon and returning him home safely was a massive problem. But what the engineers understood was that if they broke that problem down into hundreds and thousands of tiny little problems, they could string those solutions all the way to the moon and back. One of the engineers I spoke with told me they had a saying that went like this: we were each given a grain of sand and told to build a road to the moon. And the more I learned about engineering behind these missions, the more I realized that that expression was not an exaggeration at all. My book, How We Got to the Moon, is about space travel as much as it is about problem solving. And I am incredibly grateful that I was given the opportunity to bring this book into the world. My hope is that it inspires the next generation of problem solvers, whether they aim to end our dependence on fossil fuel, end hunger, cure cancer, stop global warming, or land a human being on Mars. In 2017, when I started this project, I had no idea how to go about writing a nonfiction book. I had never done one before, but like all things in my life, I tend to dive headfirst into the maelstrom and not look back. I was fortunate to be surrounded by an incredible support team. First and foremost is my wife, Haley, who not only convinced me time and again that I could actually create this book, but she picked up my slack in every other aspect of our lives while I stayed glued to my office chair. She is the unsung hero of this project, and I wholeheartedly dedicate this award to her. I also want to thank my editor, Emily Easton, and the entire team at Crown for their unbridled support and help as this book came into being. Special thanks go to my friends Sharon November and Brian Floca for all their help and support. I'm incredibly indebted to all the Apollo engineers who took the time to share their stories and expertise with me. There are too many of you to name, but know that I am thinking of you all standing here beside me. I'm sorry. Your grit is second to none. And lastly, I want to thank my newfound family of nonfiction juggernauts, Candy, Christina, Elizabeth, and Arma. Keep doing the incredible work that you do. Your books are important and inspiring and set the bar extremely high. And I am really honored and humbled to be standing here with you. Thank you very much. I had to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Our next award goes to Elizabeth Rusch. You Call This Democracy: How to Fix Our Democracy and Deliver Power to the People, published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Books for Young Readers, a division of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. From gerrymandering and the Electoral College to voter suppression and unequal representation, Elizabeth Rusch breaks down some of the most important problems facing our country's representative democracy. This nonpartisan guide to civic engagement offers ample suggestions for how teens can become involved in political reform. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this incredible award and putting me in this group of talented, beautiful people. It's such an honor for my book to be honored in the presence of such greatness and such heart. This is the first time that I have written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten a speech. And that's because I have so much to say about our democracy. And there's so much going on right now. And it was really hard to figure out what to really focus on. So here's what I have. Know that 20 minutes from now, I might write something completely different. But this is what I have now. So why did a group of Americans attack their own capital on January 6th? It's clear that lies trumpeted by the former president, paired with his urgings to fight, incited that violent attempt to overturn the results of an election. But I'm left with some questions. Why was the former president allowed to lie again and again and again? And what about our democracy made it even possible for people to believe that our elections don't represent the will of the people? The sad truth is that while the marauders were dead wrong about voter fraud, it's a non-issue in this country, as case after case has shown. They may have been partially acting out of a vague sense that there is something not quite right with our democracy. And it's time that we did something about it. Because of our antiquated electoral college system, citizens in 44 states cast votes that they know don't really matter in the contest for the presidency. Think about it, 5 million Republicans in California alone really feel that they have no real voice because they live in a blue state. Half of states allow politicians to draw voting district maps that can benefit themselves, their buddies, and their parties. How can we call elections based on these maps fair? The oversized role of money in elections and lawmaking gives citizens real reason to suspect that lawmakers don't always work for them. These are just a few of the features of our democracy that undermine the principle that we all believe in of one person, one vote. But here's what I'm really afraid of. With the impeachment hearings over, people will move on. We can't move on. Traditionally, these speeches are used to thank everyone involved in publishing the book, and I am so grateful to so many. And I really hope you know who you are. Thank you. But I want to take the time here to thank some less obvious people, the ordinary citizens who work to form a more perfect union, to demand a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. People like Katie Fahey, who was just 26 years old when she started a bipartisan movement to end gerrymandering in Michigan. People like the self-named badass grandmas, a Democrat and a Republican who led an effort to pass anti-corruption legislation in North Dakota. These and other heroes that I write about in the book prove that the power of people can beat the power of habit and the power of money and the power of party politics. We have the power to shape a democracy that truly reflects the will of the people. But we can't turn away and hope that someone else will fix it. Our nation, our democracy needs us all right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Our final award of the day goes to our 2021 Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults winner, Candace Fleming, for her book, The Rise and Fall of Charles Lindbergh, published by Schwartz and Wade, an imprint of Random House Children's Books, a division of Penguin Random House. Charles Lindbergh is one of the most complicated figures in American history. Celebrated aviator, dogged scientist, heartbroken father, Nazi sympathizer, unapologetic eugenicist, Candace Fleming shows all the facets of a deeply flawed American hero. In a well-researched, engaging narrative, Fleming brings Lindbergh to life, warts and all. I am pleased to welcome Candace.
Thank you. I'm going to start with some facts this evening. On the grounds of the Minnesota State Capitol, there stands a statue of Charles Lindbergh. There's one at the San Diego airport too, and another at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Across America, there are over 2,000 streets and avenues named after the famous flyer. In St. Louis, the new Holocaust Museum and Learning Center is in the process of building a new museum. Its new address will be on Lindbergh Boulevard. We might change that, one of the docents, Hadley Assid, recently wrote to me after she read my book. There are dozens of Charles A. Lindbergh school districts. There are hundreds of Charles A. Lindbergh elementary schools and high schools and middle schools. I wonder if those students ever ask about their school's namesake. I wonder what they're told. Charles Lindbergh was an American aviator who made the first nonstop solo transatlantic flight. The 33-plus-hour flight from New York to Paris won fame and fortune for Lindbergh, but these ultimately resulted in tragedy when his infant son was kidnapped and murdered. Lindbergh later became a writer and published multiple memoirs, The Spirit of St. Louis won Lindbergh a Pulitzer Prize. This is the Lindbergh entry on Homeschool Mom's downloadable curriculum page. It's all the good bits and none of the bad. So much of what we tell young people is just the good bits. We overlook, forget, ignore the rest. We call this history, but often it's simply meant as monument. I began this book looking at the kidnapping. It was a fascinating slice of American true crime. At least that's what I thought I was going to write. But the more I read, the more research I did, I realized that Lindbergh's life, his fame, and his influence are woven deep into America's fabric. Echoes of his past had become part of my daily present. Political rallies that seethed with rage, attacks on the press, increasing xenophobia, a border wall, America first. I hesitated, though. I knew that taking a deep dive into Lindbergh's life was not going to be easy or comfortable. Charles Lindbergh is cold and exacting, unsettling and disturbing. His lifelong beliefs in eugenics, his admiration for Nazism, his deep conviction in the superiority of white European men, all so openly expressed in his speeches and his published journals, they're abhorrent. But what I found most terrifying about Charles Lindbergh was his guise. For most of the 20th century, Lindbergh was the face of our nation's traditional values: American ingenuity and know-how, decency and wholesomeness, rugged individualism, pulling oneself up by their bootstraps, handsome, healthy, morally upright, America's hero. We must band together with Nazi Germany, Lindbergh told a listening audience of millions in 1941, his voice cracking with passion, to preserve the most priceless possession, our inheritance of European blood. And the venerating crowd cheered. At home, in my office, I looked up from my research and I thought, this sounds familiar. I told the life story and I tried to tell it fairly. It was an uneasy path, full of uncertainty. Could I celebrate Lindbergh's astonishing, and it was astonishing, transatlantic flight, despite his later words and actions? Was it okay to write sympathetically at times about this man who suffered unimaginable tragedies, struggled with his faith and mortality, was loved, is still loved by his children? Should I even write about Charles Lindbergh at all? I thought long and hard about that last question. And here's how I answered myself. By choosing not to write or read about the detestable and unjustifiable, we are forever bound to the mistakes and misfortunes of previous generations. But by looking as honestly as possible at this man, using facts and evidence, we can, perhaps, understand why we misguidedly venerated him in the first place. But we have to look at all of it, because only by seeing all of it can we learn the deepest truths about his times and ultimately about our own. I think history, especially written for young people, should be something to be debated and disputed, its premises questioned and examined, its arguments countered. We don't have to fill in all the blanks for teens or connect the dots as if that's even possible. We present the story and then trust them to grapple with the complexities and complications, the contradictions, the messiness. We trust them to draw the right conclusions. By kicking it to the reader, as author Tanya Bolden calls it, we turn passive reverence into rigorous inquiry. Charles Lindbergh. What is history's verdict? What will young people's verdict be? The past, it's our gift and our burden. It can't be shirked, no matter how much we want to look away or hide it in a dark closet or just walk on. We carry it everywhere, into schools and political rallies, down boulevards and into public policy. There's nothing for it but to get to know it. And by knowing our past in all its glory and its ugliness, we can learn how to live in the present. This award, which Nicole brought to my house last week in the middle of a pandemic and a snowstorm, thus proving that YALSA is a full-service organization, is a blessing for so many reasons, not the least of which is the opportunity to share space with these heartbreaking, heart-racing, thought-provoking books. Thank you, John and Christina and Amra and Liz, for creating books that make a difference and for being my new friends now. You're not going to get rid of me. Thank you for Ann Schwartz. Thank you, Ann Schwartz and Adrian Weintraub and the rest of my Random House family for not only supporting me, but encouraging me to write books like this one. And thank you, Adrian Gillespie and the members of the 2021 Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults Committee for this tremendous and heavy, I'm not kidding, hold on, honor. It is heavy, but gorgeous. You are all the very best kind of heroes. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace. And thank you so much to YALSA's Excellence in Nonfiction finalists and winner. We're now going to move on to the question and answer portion of the event. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can in the time remaining. And we're going to progress in the same order that people presented in. So the first question is, and we're going to ask the questions to everybody, just so the people in the audience know how this is going to work. So the first question is that as a writer, you have to make choices about details and scenes to include and to leave out. Is there something that you really wanted to include but left out or chose to edit out? And Amra, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Sure. That's a great question. And for me, there was certainly a debate and struggle in deciding not only how many stories to include. I think if I had included everything I had wanted to share, there would have been a 2,000-page book, and I couldn't do that. So the goal was really to represent the dichotomy of the emotions that I felt and their intensity during an experience like genocide. So there are stories of love that are beautiful, along with the stories of loss and tragedy and hate and fear, and scenes like the moment when I was almost attacked and raped by a Serb soldier. But there was also a struggle with certain themes in the book, like, for instance, sexual violence. There was, just to give you an example, there was a story of someone that I dearly love who was a young woman in a rape camp who was raped, became pregnant, delivered the baby that was then executed in front of her. And on one hand, I wanted to find a way to share the brutality of that act and her own trauma, and really communicate that sexual violence is not incidental violence. It is intentional. In this case, it was intentional to break down the spirit and resilience of Muslim women in Bosnia. But on the other hand, I also was considerate of trying to protect people that I love and thinking about often shame that women feel relating to being raped. And that, I think, demonstrates the tragedy of the continued hesitation for women who are victims of sexual violence to share those stories. And so in respect of the person that I love, and in respect of her pain and suffering, I decided not to share that story. But there were quite a few stories like that that I had decided to exclude, and perhaps there will be another occasion or another book in the future in which I will be able to handle them for perhaps a more mature audience.
John, how about you?
How about me? It's interesting. This question brings me back to the very beginning of my research when I was working on this book. There was a story that I got very excited about, and it had to do with some surfers in Seal Beach, California, where they built the second stage of the Saturn V rocket. They were having problems with the insulation. And I came across a story about how NASA hired these surfers to help them shape the insulation panels so that they would adhere to the side of the rocket, and which was a very problematic thing because the propellants inside the Saturn V rocket were so cold that they would cause air to liquefy, and that would make these insulation panels peel off. So getting them sort of sealed to the side without any air pockets was very critical. And so anyway, I researched the story. I found it in a documentary film, I found it in a book, and I found it in a magazine article. And my father, who writes science papers, said to me, if you're going to write nonfiction, you have to find 3 sources, and those sources have to kick butt. Like, not this Wikipedia or any of this stuff. So I was like, okay, I got to find 3 sources. And what I realized was that the documentary was produced by the guy who wrote the book that I found this information in, and the article from the magazine was talking about the documentary. So suddenly I only had one source. And I was like, okay, I got to find another source. And I ended up tracking down a surfboard shaper who had a store in Seal Beach, California in the 1960s and was still alive, still shaping surfboards. And I called him up and I said, look, I'm trying to follow up with this story. And he said, yeah, no, we wouldn't have used honeycomb insulation. I've never heard of that. So I was like, okay. So then I tracked down another source who was actually working at Seal Beach on the second stage of the Saturn V, and he could not confirm it either. So then I had a problem. I can't use this story. And as much as it might be true, and if you're a surfer that worked on the second stage of the Saturn V, call me. But I couldn't use it. And so that was like a lesson in research for someone who's a first-time nonfiction author, because I really wanted to get this book right. And I found doing my research, there's actually a lot of wrong information out there, especially on the internet, but even in books. And so I really had to double check, triple check, quadruple check things. I found that a lot of the stories or information, at least the data from certain aspects of Kennedy Space Center, had changed over the years when they switched from the Saturn V rocket launches to the space shuttle launches. So that was a whole process of undoing information and things when after it went through copy editing. So, you know, it was valuable to learn that process and suddenly find out like, oh, this is more of a treasure hunt than I thought it was going to be. But luckily, I had a lot of people that worked on the Apollo program to actually guide me, and I was able to contact specialists from every system, from the parachute system to the engines to the rescue team, that helped me make sure I got everything correct. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful. So that's my hopefully short and sweet answer to that question.
Yeah, we're not on any kind of timeline here. Liz, how about you?
Yeah, so I think my answer is actually that I would have written about something a little bit differently now. So it's interesting when a book comes out and you start talking about it, sometimes you find a way to say something that you wish you had used in the book. So what I've been talking a lot about with media and with adults and with teenagers, with all kinds of people, is this idea of becoming a cell phone citizen. So we all have 5 people whose job it is to represent us. So we have our 2 senators and our US representative, and then we have a state senator and usually a state representative. And we also have these really powerful tools that we carry around with us all the time. So what I encourage, and I wish I had put it this way in the book, what I really encourage everyone to do is to take, like literally it takes 5 minutes to find out who your 5 representatives are and put them in your cell phone. So put in their name, their title, and their email address and their phone number. And then you can use your cell phone to make democracy work, to actually reach out to your representatives and let them know if something about the way the elections are running doesn't seem right to you, or really about any issue. The other thing that I really like about this is that you don't have to be an eligible voter to be a cell phone citizen. So this is something that teenagers can do as well. If you live in someone's district, you are their constituent, and they want to hear from you. And I think that our democracy works best when we participate, and not just during once every 4 years during a presidential election, but all the time.
Thank you. Candace.
You guys see me getting all excited there? I was looking for my cell phone, which I put in the other room so I wouldn't be distracted by it. I wanted to show Liz that I have not all 5, but I have 3 and a whole bunch of other representatives that are not from my district or my state that I complain to pretty frequently. Yeah, you can, and it's fun to just tell them what you think. So good for you. I'm trying to think about, what is Lindbergh comes in at 70,000 words. I don't think you guys really missed anything that I didn't put in there. But here's the deal. When I was doing, when I thought this book was still about the kidnapping and solely the kidnapping, I actually thought I would write extensively about some of those theories out there about who was really behind that crime. Did Bruno Hauptmann have help? Was it an inside job involving the servants, or that most persistent, I think, pernicious theory that Lindbergh was behind it himself? And if my focus had been on the kidnapping, I had planned to go deep into and delve into each one of those theories. And it would have been, I thought, a lot of fun, like playing detective. But there wasn't any space for that in this book, and it wasn't relevant to the story I ended up telling. But those would have been the things that I probably would have added if somebody had said, you've got another 20,000 words, Candy. Just for the record, all that, despite all the monstrous things that Lindbergh said and did in his life, he really didn't kidnap his own baby. And if all you have to do is think about how organized, meticulous, what a great list maker he was. And when he wanted something done, he got it done. So that kidnapping would never have been that botched if he'd actually had any part in it. But it would have been sort of fascinating. And I think probably readers would have loved hearing about it. Yeah, like your surfer guy, John.
This is probably going to be our last question, just looking at the clock. And so I'm going to ask you to each talk a little bit about community in your books, because each of your books highlights communities that either people join or they reject or they're rejected by. And so I'd like if you could each tell us a little bit about the various communities within your books.
So I assume I'm gonna go first.
Yeah.
In the book, obviously the community that I focus on is that of Bosniaks or Bosnian Muslims. And our community is a very interesting one, highly culturally diverse, because Bosniaks have for hundreds of years existed in this intersectional space between East and West. And so our language, our cuisine, our cultural practices, traditions, very much represent multiple worlds, in some cases really multiple colonizers or oppressors in that region. But that diversity, particularly representation of Islam within Bosniak community, has made us a target of violence, particularly in 1990s. And so there is now within the community this shared sense of intergenerational trauma and loss and tragedy, where in many ways, those who I have never met, who may be living today in Australia or Belgium or Azerbaijan, will reach out to me and really have a sense of connection, because we share those traumas and losses and pain that occurred in 1990s. And today, interestingly, vast majority of Bosnians actually live outside of the country. So we're one of these places where most people live around the world rather than in their proper homeland. But I would also say we are a community that has, through our own suffering, acquired the sense of empathy for the groups that are discriminated against or excluded or invisible in other societies. And so many of us, whether we live in the United States, as I do today, or elsewhere around the world, are very much focused on engaging with issues of social justice, exclusion, marginalization. Just today, I was working on a proposal for an academic scholarly manuscript with two other Bosnian women who live in different localities that deals with the importance of storytelling in addressing and countering hatred. I also have many friends who are medical doctors today in New York City and who were the first to volunteer when it was early days of the pandemic to do everything that they can. And so I think we have developed as a community, as a consequence of genocide, the sense of what I call morally resilient activism. It is very hard to resist hating someone in response when they kill, execute, rape your entire family. But I think many of us, and I'm deeply proud of this, have found ways to counter violence and hatred in a constructive way. And that is a message really that I try to deliver in The Cat I Never Named as well. And I think that is the message that many librarians, teachers, and teens have found valuable about the Bosniak community, particularly at this time in our shared history.
Thank you. John.
So community, I thought about that for a little while. And what comes to mind is that in the 1960s, when Kennedy said, you know, we're going to go to the moon, there was another agenda that was going on, which was a fight for equality. and the civil rights movement. And what happened was, after Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, Johnson decided that the best way to integrate and desegregate the South was to put all the NASA facilities in the Deep South, and then hire as many African Americans to come work for the program as possible. The problem was that the communities that these facilities were at, and we're talking about Houston, we're talking about Huntsville, Alabama, we're talking about Brevard County in Florida, which is where Cape Kennedy is, and where basically the headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan was. And Johnson dumped all this money into setting up the facilities in the Deep South so that he could integrate the workforce. The problem was that these were communities that were adhering to the Jim Crow laws of segregation. And so in order to get African-American engineers working for NASA, you couldn't get them from the South because none of those schools were integrated. They were all segregated schools. And so basically, they had to call northern schools, which allowed Black engineers to go to college and get a degree in engineering. And it was very difficult to convince them to come down to Brevard County or Huntsville, Alabama, to come work on this moonshot program. So, you know, community had a lot to do with what was going on. And there were many who said, you know what, this is the way I'm going to march. I'm going to go down and work as an engineer on this moon mission. And that was their way of contributing to the civil rights movement. And so there's a lot of interesting stories there, which hopefully I'll be exploring in my next book. So thank you.
Thank you. Liz.
Yeah, so there are two groups in this country that get a lot of attention, Democrats and Republicans. But I want to talk about a third and very, very large group, and that is non-voters. So in the 2020 election, 74 million people voted for Trump, 81 million voted for Biden, and 80 million Americans did not vote. So there's a huge group in our country who are not engaged in our democracy. And I want to know what they think. I want to know who they would vote for. There are a couple of things that we really need to do. So about 40 million people in our country are not registered to vote. The United States is one of the only developed democracies in the world where the onus on registering is on citizens rather than on the government. So what we really need in this country is automatic voter registration. So the government, whose job it is to govern, that it's their responsibility to register people to vote. And I don't think that it should be tied to your driver's license. I don't think that you need to be a driver to be a voter. So we should automatically be registering people to vote. But I think that the other thing that we need to do is fix our democracies so that people really feel like their voices matter. I think that people will be more engaged if we do away with things like gerrymandering, if we do away with the Electoral College, if we get money out of politics. And, I think that in order to really call ourselves a democracy, we need to hear from all voices in communities across the country.
Thank you. And Candace.
Oh, I thought about this question long and hard because, Lindbergh moved in and out of so many communities during his life. He joined them, he took what he needed from them, and then he moved on. And he never looked back, and he didn't carry many friendships. He didn't carry any friendships from one group to the next. He was pretty compartmentalized in that respect. One of the communities, though, that utterly fascinated me was the medical community that he became a part of, even though, and he even worked with a Nobel Prize winning doctor, Dr. Alexis Carrel, at the Institute of Medicine in New York, all without having more than an 8th grade degree. But he was the famous Charles Lindbergh, and so the scientists basically thought he could do anything. And Lindbergh had this idea about human bodies, that they were like machines, other machines, cars or airplanes, and that they had replaceable parts, or at least parts that could be taken out of the body, fixed, and then put back in, like you would with a carburetor in a vehicle. And it was a novel idea back in the early 1930s, long before doctors were doing transplants or bypass surgeries. And so he worked in this lab, and he actually he invented this thing called the perfusion pump that allowed, for the very first time, a human organ to live outside of the body. And Lindbergh was obsessed with this work until he wasn't. In typical fashion, he sort of finished with it, moved on to his next community, which would be European diplomacy. And he never really looked back. He even severed the ties that he had with Dr. Carrel, which at one point in their relationship had been more father-son relationship than a working relationship. And that was one of the things that I thought was at least most fascinating for me, was this strange and sudden work that he does in the middle of the life that has nothing to do with anything else that he will do. And here's my fun fact for that. If you guys have ever seen Boris Karloff in Frankenstein, the black and white 1930s movie, you see the mad scientist's laboratory, Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory, all the time. Front and center, there is a glass medical instruments, curved, and it's got this bubbling liquid in it. That is an exact replica of Lindbergh's perfusion pump, which tells you what the public actually thought about what Lindbergh was doing in laboratories. So next time you watch it, because I know you guys watch it all the time, look for it. It's kind of fascinating.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for your speeches and for your answers. And on behalf of YALSA, I sincerely thank all of you for joining me in celebrating this year's finalist and winner. We hope that you can join us again on Wednesday, February 24th at 6 p.m. Central Time for a speed dating style event with the authors that appear on the 2021 vetted list of nominated titles. And again on Thursday, February 25th at 6 p.m. Central Time to celebrate the Morris winner and finalists. Thank you again and have a great evening.